Welcome, Chris. It is very nice to see you.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Um, Everybody, welcome to this. I would say it's going to be a very fun discussion between myself and Christopher Rosati. This is going to be talking about ADUs, SB9, SB35, basically housing policy in the state of California. I am the founder of the ADU University. I have a company called Yimby ADU. Yes, in my backyard ADU, and we have we like housing. Chris and I have known each other for several years because he sits on the planning board with the city of Burbank. He is also, and he's done that for how many years?
I'm serving a third term, so it'll be 12 years when I'm done.
And you're currently the chair.
I am the chair.
So you direct the planning, you kind of help run the meetings, and as you deliberate all the topics that come before the planning board.
Yes, I kind of orchestrate the meeting. And the way I like to do it is I want every single board member to participate. And sometimes my job is to elicit, because I want as much information for all of us so we can make a proper decision for the residents.
So that's what you do for as volunteer time, because that's not a paid position.
It is not a paid position.
So, and I really, and thank you for being here, because I know you're really busy, because you are also a full-time real estate broker, and you are here in Burbank. And so you have a very successful office. And so that takes time. Not only you have a family, you have other obligations. So this hour that you're going to be spending with us, I think is really appreciated, because you're going to be, your perspective is, you want to limit some of the housing that has been encouraged by the state. You're listening, sure. Hey, it's not going to necessarily, from your perspective, be in the best interest of the community. So you have kind of a NIMBYist, not in my backyard kind of color to some of your perspectives.
That is true.
So before we jump into this, because we already have it recording, I do want to welcome everybody that's here, and welcome anybody who's watching the recording at the ADU University. My name is David Donahue. I'm going to be the host. Our panelist, as I introduced a moment ago, is Christopher Rosati, and we're going to be spending some time talking about ADUs, yes, in my backyard and not my backyard, from professionals that are in the space, and we're going to have a good conversation. Just a quick reference, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A, and I'll try to get them as best as I can. And we'll try to wrap up a little with our discussion between the two of us a little bit early, so that we can kind of take some questions if you'd like to. So with that, thank you very much. One of the things I want to kind of start off with is some definitions. So those of you who don't know certain things, the RHNA numbers, we hear that all the time. Regional Housing Need Assessment. And Chris, from your perspective, what are the regional housing numbers to you? What do they mean to you?
Well, what they mean to me, or what they really are, I don't know. They mean to me, there's, is there a jobs to housing imbalance? Do we have enough housing specifically in the city of Burbank? How they attain that number, whether that number is accurate, I'm not 100% sure. And I think that now, and I said that at the very beginning of the ADU legislation years ago. And I think now there are groups that have questioned it so much that there's litigation against it.
Basically, and I think it's the Southern California Association of Governments, along with some other sort of agencies, compiled and came up with the metrics for that. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so what you're saying is people, communities, jurisdictions, groups are looking in, how did you come up with those numbers? What were the factors that you used? Because it is being implemented across the state of California, that if you're not at your 50% of your RHNA, then you've lost certain components of your housing element, that jurisdictions, cities like Burbank, have lost the ability to say no to certain things.
They've lost their local control, correct.
Yeah, and I understand how that can be definitely a motivating factor. One of the things that we talked about before we got started is your role as chairman of the planning board with the city of Burbank, and that's a volunteer position. And if you could just kind of share with us how long you've been doing that and what are some of the responsibilities of the planning board?
So I've been on the planning board 9 years. Again, I was just reelected, or reappointed. It's not an elected position, reappointed to a third term. I've been chair numerous times. I can't really count. It's been a long time. And basically our role on the planning board is we look at from very small things like beer and wine permits for restaurants. We look at the data, whether it's a good idea. But me personally, being a resident born and raised in Burbank, sometimes I could just look at a location, knowing the history of that location and the activity levels, and say, is this a good place for this project? Is this not a good place for this project? So we look at small things like beer and wine permit, and then we have study sessions for, some of its traffic, streets, roads, pedestrian right-of-ways, all the way up to huge projects, the skyscrapers, to the Nickelodeon project, to the Warner Brother expansion, Disney expansion. So it's a fairly busy board. When we have a packet, sometimes when we did the airport expansion, my packet was 6 telephone books high.
Oh my goodness.
And when I say expansion, it's the expansion of the
Sure,
terminal, not the airport. But the amount of information that we look at is tremendous.
And I think it's really nice, and I appreciate the fact that people such as yourself that do have a concern about the community do volunteer your time, because it is not oh, hey, let's just go sit in for an hour and then get out of there. Some of these deliberations because it's over at City Hall where you all meet, you could be there for hours and hours.
Correct.
And you do have to be prepared for that. And so that kind of got me. So, and you touched on a little bit the motivation of why you're giving back to your community. Could you kind of share what motivates you just to do that?
Well, I was born and raised in Burbank. I love it dearly. I love the city. I love everything about it. And I'm all for progress. And I want to make sure that progress is done in the correct way. And I think that there's a lot of history and knowledge that I have that can say, you know what, this will work. I can see it working. Or you know what, this is not going to work. And the reason why is because project XYZ 20, 30 years ago didn't work in that location. I think most of our forecasting is done through the eyes of traffic awareness,
Right.
pedestrian awareness. I think that has the major impact. There's some projects, and I can't remember the name of it, but there's a chicken stand that just went into Burbank. It was a buy right project with the drive-through. It's caused a lot of angst amongst the residents, rightfully so. There's been a lot of traffic issues. If that came through the planning board, I do not think that probably would have opened, but it was a buy right project. So we look at these things and say, this is just probably too close to residential, too much noise, too many crowds. It won't work.
Yeah, you touched on something that I did not have in my notes, but I want to ask you to go and dive into a little bit. And what does it mean by right? Because I'm hearing and reading a lot about that in jurisdictions across the state that are going to be they're going to be feeling it.
So if a property is already zoned specifically for something, and that something may have closed or the property turned over, the new owner can put the same thing or something similar there. So I'll give you the instance with the chicken stand. It was a bank with a drive-through, and the bank closed. It was zoned for commercial and restaurant. The restaurant bought it and opened the drive-through. Well, two different businesses, two different models,
Right.
And one of them is very popular. The chicken place is kind of the rage right now. I think it's called Raising Cane. Maybe some of you have heard it or not, but it has caused people from all over, droves and droves of people to come to Burbank to go to Raising Cane's. So by right, they were able to open this up with the drive-through without going through the city process. When I say the process, through the planning board and city council. So we didn't get a chance to weigh in on it. And therefore, now we're stuck with a project that has caused some problems.
Yeah, and I am familiar with the some of the issues because I do follow the city council, and what I understand and what I've seen is, you know, the dozens and dozens of cars that do line up to get into their drive-through, and the ones and the people that will park in the neighborhood, so much so that the people that live there are dealing with zero parking and typically in the evening, and also a lot of trash and debris. But that's another conversation. Before I really get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation, I wanted to ask, you know, what would you recommend to people who are considering volunteering or running for a board or commission where they live?
I think it's worthwhile doing. If you have it in your heart to serve, I strongly urge you to do it. I know that there's a lack of people that do serve, and I know that sometimes cities and municipalities are constantly searching for new people, and I am a proponent of people being engaged. You should be engaged in your community. You should know what's going on. The residents and everyone should have a say because you all live there, and you should have a say in where you live.
And I agree with that 100%, because if you're not engaged, if you're not following, a lot of things could happen and you have no input on. And there you do, your voice can be heard. So even if it's going in front of city council with an email, a telephone call, or communicating in some way, even that, just that, you know, small amount of effort to do does have an impact. They do it. We started the question, you know, about the RENA numbers. Let's dive into Burbank. It's like, what do you think? How do you see the city of Burbank being able to address their RENA numbers? Because they have a goal, but I think it's 2027. I think 2027, 26, I forget the exact year, for their 6-year period that they have to increase housing by over 8,000.
Look, I think it's going to be tough to do. You're talking about a lot of units. Do I think they'll come close? Maybe. There are a number of ways to get to that number. There's SB 35, which is kind of like a by right type, you know, build where the developer come in without much city say and build. And then there's developers that are going to have planned development where the city does have say. So there's multiple ways to reach those numbers. But we also have to realize, and just speaking from experience, I can't tell you how many projects that were approved at my level, beautiful projects I really wanted to see happen that never got built. And the reason why is because, one, the economy may have changed and they couldn't get the financing. Two, they were a little overzealous in their planning and they couldn't get financing and make the numbers work. And three, sometimes they just decide, you know what, I'm just going to sell the project and move on. So there's a lot of projects that even in today's world that we have approved, city at the planning board level and at the city level, that they still haven't even broken ground yet. So just because we pass something doesn't mean it's actually going to equate to numbers, units.
Yeah. And thank you for that. The one thing you mentioned about the SB 35s is being able to kind of get close to the RENA numbers. I mean, I know that's one of the things that I've seen, and I'm a very strong housing person. I'm definitely a proponent. ADUs, SB9, I'm all for that 100%. The one thing I'm having some sort of hesitation on, and maybe one of the few things we may share some similarities, is the SB 35 development of low income, high rise, densified without any parking. And I mean, you know, one that's actually been in the city, that's been entitled, if that's the correct phrase, to be built, 146 units, 262 bedrooms, and 7 parking spots. And I think that in the city of Burbank, that is going to have an effect. And I'd be very interested to hear what your thoughts are on that entitled project and the multiple other projects, I think, by that same developer for that same area, of what it may do. Yes, it's going to get us a lot of numbers, 800 of them actually, I think, towards our RENA. but it's also going to bring in probably a couple thousand people. And I would guess more than half of them are going to have cars that they're going to drive.
So let me start off by saying, and this goes back to the whole ADU discussion way back when. So many people said to me, "You're a realtor. You're supposed to be for housing. You're supposed to be for residents and apartments and for, you know, skyscrapers." I think people think because I'm a realtor, I'm also a developer. Two different things.
Yes.
The other thing is I'm not for destroying the product that I sell, which is Burbank and Burbank neighborhoods. I do not want to destroy that product. There are SB 35 products that are completely irresponsible, like the one you just mentioned that's being built with 7 parking spaces or 21 parking spaces once they build the thing completely out. Then you got responsible, beautiful SB 35 projects like the Pickwick project.
Right.
You know, I don't have a problem with that Pickwick project. It's a great location. It's parked right. I think the developer, he's a smart guy. If he builds a good product, he's going to make some money. The other developer, I don't think so. I think maybe he comes up with a junk project that he's going to have issues with tenants because there's going to be parking wars. There's all kinds of issues with that project. I am for smart development. I'm not for careless, reckless development. And I think that if anyone knows me, they should know that about me.
Mhm.
I am very careful about where projects should go and where projects shouldn't go. And I'm for progress, absolutely. Do people need homes? Absolutely. But let's not destroy our city in the process.
So following that, and thank you, I really appreciate that perspective. What would you consider would be an alternative solution to some of the things that are happening or what's facing us? I mean, how do we, because ADUs are one way to kind of do gentle densification. They're able, we put one in our backyard. The only thing that's the biggest difference is the fact that we we changed our fence and we have my father-in-law's car parked out front,
Because
but no one sees it. What's that?
Because your father-in-law lives there.
Yes.
So that's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. When the ADU legislation first hit my desk, I was for it. And the reason why I was for it for 2 reasons. One, it was the maximum square footage was 500 square feet. And the way it was sold to Californians or me was to help the senior citizens supplement their income and have them stay in their home. Look, I got a 93-year-old father. I get it. I totally get it. And there was a requirement that the owner would be present on the property in either one of the units, the main house or the back house. And you had my yes vote on that. I voted yes for that. When that legislation changed to anything goes, that's when you saw me push back hard. And when I say hard, I meant with all of our local representatives, congressmen, senators, assembly people, and I fought hard. And our city council, and our staff, and our city attorney. They heard from me loud and clear. And I wanted my voice to be heard. And this was prior to COVID.
Right.
And I remember saying in a public microphone, prior to COVID, I don't think having 8, 9, 10 people living on a lot is very healthy for sewer, trash, all kinds of reasons. And I have other reasons, but those were the ones I was really concerned with. Congestion. So to your point with your father-in-law, that was what the ADU was, in my opinion, should have been about. But then big business took over, and now you can rent an ADU for $5,000 a month in the back, and you can rent the front house for $6,000 or $8,000. And my question has always been, who are you helping? Who are you helping for $5,000 a month. Who's living there for $5,000 a month? I had a client, a very good client. I love him to death. He built an ADU, 500 square feet. He's got a family of 5 living there.
Really?
With 4 cars. Now, you're destroying communities by doing that. There's another issue with an ADU right now with 9 people living on a lot with 7 cars. And there are literally parking wars and divisiveness in this neighborhood. I can't even tell you. But I go back to saying, if you really, really wanted to help people from a legislative standpoint, if you really, really wanted to help people, you would have capped the ADU at $1,000 or $1,500 a month for 10 years and run it with the title of the land. Then you're helping someone. Then you got my yes vote. But you are not helping somebody when it's big business. When a developer comes in a prime neighborhood and now turns an R1 neighborhood into 3 units. I'm out.
Right. And that's SB9. I definitely understand it. I wanted to kind of follow up on some.
That's the SB. That's not SB9. That's ADU, because you're going to have a house with a junior ADU
and a detached.
And ADU. So now you got 3 units.
Yes. The part of it is, I think, on the specific performance deed restriction. I think that kind of gets into some, really sort of precarious waters where you are putting a deed restriction on somebody's property and saying, hey, limit the amount of money. And I know that, and it's just like saying with some of the SB9 legislation that got passed, that if you are going to lot split it, you do the owner has to live in it, I believe. And so there are some sort of owner occupancy things. And I think that people are maybe a little bit disingenuous about that. And it's unfortunate.
100%.
So and it's also disheartening to hear that you've seen examples, because you would in your position, where there are parking wars and there's high occupancy. But I have seen where that may be the exception and not necessarily what is most predominant. Yes, could occur, but is it I don't think that's normal. Ours, I think that a really great size is anywhere between 300 to probably 750 square feet. Ours is 734, and I have to tell you, it's just spectacular. It's full-size kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, and we have a really good-sized living room. And it's perfect for somebody who came from a 2,000 square foot place in Palm Desert. And so he's able to kind of downsize really well. The number of people that are being rented to, and where it's really high occupancy, that is interesting, and I can understand where it could be impactful. But being able to offset your income if you are renting it out, and it is, I think we're in a very unique city in Burbank, because there is such a shortage of housing that somebody could rent it out for $3,800, $4,400 a month very easily. And so that's a huge incentive. Deed restricting or with limitations, and I understand it's like, how do you really affect affordability and accessibility, keeping the rents low. But a lot of folks are using, if they had to get a HELOC, if they had to get a construction loan or had to do something, that mortgage increase is definitely going to be a burden if they're not able to get enough to pay for it and to be able to, make a little bit of money on it. So that just kind of my thought on that. So I know that the owner occupancy is going to sunset, I think next year. And I believe that Senator Anthony Portantino, who represents our area, is against having that there, that he would like it to sunset. But then we have Assembly Member Laura Friedman, who's in our district, who would definitely be a proponent. And I think a lot of people in Sacramento are a proponent of keeping the owner occupancy out.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there anything that you would see as an alternative to any of this development that you would support? That I know that each jurisdiction is different. We're very unique because we have an old IKEA building that is not currently being used. And we have, unfortunately, some very large, what used to be anchor retailers. I think, is it Bed Bath & Beyond, Sears, in this very large mall that's in our downtown area, that they've either gone out of business or going out of business. So as an example or an illustration of a way or something that could be used to get some RENA numbers, that whole area could be developed with several thousand apartments. Would you support that?
Yeah, look, I've participated in, it seems like every second or third year, a new rendition of the downtown specific plan. And I've said, this is how detailed I am about my city. If you really want to make the downtown area a completely walkable community, put walkable things in, a supermarket, a hair salon, all the things that people, dry cleaners, all the things that people need to walk to, and then build around it. And we have yet to do that. But I think that there's talk potentially of the IKEA area. I think there's talk of the old Kmart site being housing. There's talk of maybe, it depends on the new owner of the mall being housing.
Right.
I'm all for it if it's just planned right. And to say that people are going to Uber and bike all over Burbank, you're not going to fool me with that. I'm a California kid. People
Right.
like their cars. But if you want to make that, look, I've lived in very walkable communities before, and it was a pleasure to walk.
Mm-hmm.
But people aren't walking 20 blocks. They're walking 3 to 4 to 5. And you got to have those amenities downtown to make that a thriving, walkable community. And I'm all for it. I'd love to see it happen. But it has to be a good project. I've been right or wrong. I know I offended people, but I don't think the collection was a very good project. You look at that project,
And what is the collection? Just for people who are watching.
The collection is the project that faces the AMC theater.
Okay.
So you have this huge building, you have the AMC theater, and then you have this alley. It's kind of dark, it's kind of cold. It's a huge project. For whatever reason, for many reasons, it hasn't really worked well. And I don't think, and you see businesses open and close, open and close,
Right.
open and close. And what's the reason for that? You have 300 to 400 people living in that community, but where are they going if they're not coming downstairs to patronize those businesses? So again, I think we need to take a hard look at our downtown and do it right, so that way it's a thriving community.
Yeah, and I think that comment comes with, there has to be some additional controls and some balances. That's my first knee-jerk reaction I hear when you say that, when I hear you say that. And being able to kind of have some sort of common sense, sort of, going to global 30,000 feet in the air kind of perspective to say, okay, if you're going to do all this housing, how do you then incentivize people not to use their cars? Because I think that's what you're saying. The incentive is you don't need to have your car, even though you and I both do share and agree that I think in Southern California, people that are working, that are going to be living in an apartment or a condo, want to have a car. We're not going to be New York, and or any of those kind of places where we're going to have some sort of public transportation system that is going to be this gleaming golden beacon to the rest of the world. I just don't see it happening. I think a lot of people purport to say that they hope that it will happen, that the metro, by increasing all of their bus things, is going to be something great. I disagree with that, because the metro, again, with the money that they have and that they're spending billions of dollars, they still are not protecting the riders. And so if you don't protect the riders, with 5,000 plus people living on the buses, I think that's a problem, and that's an issue. And the Metro Board has been against having police officers there. So I apologize, I'm getting a little bit off track, but it goes to, how do you build 3,000, let's say it's 2,500, 2,700 apartments or condos or whatever they tend to be, and it's going to be in downtown. You're going to have that additional infrastructure. And I agree. Where's the market going to be? And where are all the other things going to support all of those people that are going to be living there? And just like there's the development on First Street, I think they had about 10%, or I'm not sure what the low income housing requirement was or is, but they have fulfilled it. but the majority of their other apartment buildings are, $2,700, $3,200 a month. So those, it's going to be market rate. That's not really in the affordable category. It does provide housing, but I guess the thing that I have about being able to support legislation, smart legislation, not SB 35, I don't think that's smart, but smart legislation to get the housing numbers in so you can saturate it in Burbank enough to kind of keep it competitive with homeowners or apartment owners, to see their rates so they're not going to be super, super high. I mean, how do you see the addition of inventory? Can it affect, I guess there's a way to ask somebody like you, can market inventory affect the demand that Burbank has and other jurisdictions have?
Yeah, of course. It's all supply and demand. And, I've seen the cycle in our community. When Lockheed went out, the supply went way up. The rents went way down. The home prices went way down. When the .com and the movie industry took off, and everything got retooled towards movies and video and things like that, internet, things heated up again. I mean, it's all about supply and demand. Right now, I think we're kind of in a weird, somewhat downturn, maybe. I've seen more supply than I've seen in a long time. I've seen more apartments coming down in value in a long time. And again, I think people are moving out of the area. Some people are pulling the plug on California altogether, and it's making it more affordable. And
are you seeing that? I mean, you're in the business, but are you seeing that? I hear it, but what are you seeing with people?
100% seeing. I'm in escrow right now on a house for $945,000. That would have been 1.2 a year ago today.
Right.
Easily 1.2 a year ago today. So I am 100% seeing it. It's taking longer to find tenants, to fill vacancies. And then I think there's a tiering process. And when I say tiering, as new units come online, I think there are people in some of the older 40s, 50s, 60s bungalows that, they're at a stage of life where they might want something a little nicer, central and heating instead of window units. And those people graduate out, and then the rents for that unit are lower in the duplex or triplex, and people move in there. So there's kind of a tiering thing that goes on over time. I've seen it with my tenants where they've grown out of that. It worked because they were in their mid 20s to 30s. And now that they graduated to something a little nicer. And then I get somebody coming into Burbank, maybe, they have a lower level job and they're in their 20s and they're starting out. That's how I started out. I started out in a 1-bedroom apartment, and 3 years later, I became the owner of that building. In that very building that I was renting. And when I started out, my rent was $500 a month. I'll never forget it. My mortgage, I was making my mortgage payment with $100 to spare. $100 to spare.
That's close.
So for me, it wasn't necessarily at that time, you can't see into the future at that age.
Right.
It wasn't about money per month. It was about ownership. I wanted to own something, and over time, the values went up, but I didn't want to rent my entire life. So that was my thrust. Now I know that the world has changed, and some people don't want to own anything, and to each their own. That's what this country is about.
It is. And thank you for that. I've been following the city council, and what they've talked about is, tenants' rights. We're talking, and affordability, tenants' rights, affordability, and availability. And I was recently at a city council meeting where I was really struggling hard to see if the city council themselves has a plan to really kind of affect any real meaningful change of how they're going to be able to do that. I know that they've talked about, particularly on some of the council campaigns, there should be some sort of an incentive for Burbank employees, whether you're working for the police, fire, or school district, or and also definitely city employees, those four categories, to make some sort of incentive to keep them here, to make sure that they stay here and they're not hired in, trained up, and then go someplace else that's paying them more. Because, you know, it just makes sense to, like, hi, you're making $25 an hour, and then, hey, we're going to pay you 45 or whatever the numbers are. But how do you think the city council itself is going to be able to address these issues that I don't see that they want to, that they're talking about, but I don't see how that they can get there? And I understand some of the policies that are there, and I see how housing is going to be developed. SB 35, not a fan. SB 9 and ADUs, definitely a fan. But how do you think that the city council has a plan? Do they have a plan? I don't necessarily think they do.
I can tell you that there's been a lot of study sections. I can tell you that we have specifically delegated certain areas for redevelopment. I think that there's a plan, at least, you know, our 2035 vision and our city plan. It's whether we get there or not, I don't know. I don't know, honestly. A lot of it's going to have to depend on the economy.
Right.
I remember saying, you know, somebody asked me in a planning session, Mr. Rizzotti, how can we stimulate building? I said, simple, incentives. Number one, right. If you change any of those commercial corridors over by the Lockheed District, off of Hollywood Way and San Fernando Road to residential, all of a sudden you completely changed everything about that commercial building for a developer to come in and purchase it and put housing. Right. So just that simple zone change will change the dynamics of that area. The second thing is incentives through taxes. If you want people to sell because you want turnover so that you can redevelop, then do something where they're not going to be nailed in taxes when they do sell.
Does the city have that ability to do that?
I think that there are ways that they can work with the government if you're going to potentially put in housing that helps low income, moderate income, things like that. So, but these are the things that I was thinking outside of the box of, if we want to stimulate this stuff where we're tearing down these 1930s, 40s bungalows in large areas and develop it into housing of today,
right?
You can give it an incentive for these people to sell.
And I think that makes a lot of sense, and to be able, because there are, you know, and that was mentioned at the city council meeting on Tuesday that I attended, where they're like, I know that I'm going to have to pay capital gains on this.
Yeah.
Because they inherited it, or they've owned it for 30 or 40 years. Yeah. And their cost basis is super low and the values are in the millions. So again, I definitely understand that part of it. But I without those incentives, because they don't exist, I think that it is a lot of, I'm afraid that it's just rhetoric that councils and other sort of decision-making bodies throughout the state say they want to do, without really having a true vision on how to accomplish it. And then that may be something that Sacramento could look at, of saying, okay, to a jurisdiction, if you're struggling because you have these barriers, and identify those barriers. You've identified a few of them: taxes, cost bases. Let's look at this to kind of, how do you want to change it? Where do you want to change it?
Well, I mean, look, that's why it's being shoved down our throat right now, is because I think, and I'm going to say this on both sides, rightfully so, whether it was council dragging their feet in the past on building or residents opposing building. Because the residents, every time there was look, I've been here my entire life. Every time there was a project, I don't care how great it was, I don't care where it was, there was opposition to it. Right. And sometimes it got built. Most of the time it did not get built because the council members felt the heat and did not want to comply. So they decided to pass the buck. here we are now, 20, 30 years later. And if you look at our housing, what we've done over the years, it hasn't been much. So now the state came in and said, okay, we don't trust you anymore. We're going to shove it down your throat. So
you really touched on something I've been meaning to ask. I'm wanting to ask somebody. And you, a lifetime Burbank resident, a real estate agent who's been working in here for years, very successful, and somebody who's serving on the planning board. In your opinion, do you think that the city council or the residents ever in their wildest dreams could have imagined that Sacramento would have said, guess what? We're coming at you and we're shoving it, like you said, down your throat. Did anybody see that coming?
no. And I'm going to say this. When we did our overlay plan,
Right.
we designated areas that were commercial for residential. I don't think at that time, those council members ever thought, well, the state's going to come in and say, thank you, we're taking it. And if they did, I don't think that they would have designated certain areas as residential. And I'll give you the perfect example, Pickwick, right? Council members designated that area in an overlay for residential. And all of a sudden the state came in and said, okay, we see that SB 35 is good there and we'll take it. And that's what happened. I think if any council member in today's world knew that, they probably wouldn't have designated that area as housing. So in answer to your question, no, I don't think so. I don't think that they ever thought the state was going to come in and do this. It is heavy-handed. I wish we could have another bite of the apple. I wish we could say, look, well, let us do this, but let us do it in a way that's thoughtful and not destructive.
Okay, let me push back on that one a little bit. Thoughtful and not destructive, and having another bite at the apple. It sounds all well and good. Not everybody is a Christopher Bazzotti sitting there with decades of experience and insight. They are, let's just take a look at the city council right now. I mean, I would say 3 of them are under 40. And the other 2, maybe just above that a little bit. But how do you take a city council that probably has very little background and being able to direct staff to come up with a program? Who are they going to listen to?
I don't know if it has to go both ways. I think you gotta have faith in the staff, right? And the direction that the staff is bringing you, and you gotta balance both. You know, look, I love our staff. I think they're the best in the world. I sometimes I'm really rough on staff, but at the end of the meeting, I respect them. I respect their knowledge. I respect me more because I've lived here. They have not lived here. They know things. I know things that they don't know, but I think there's got to be a good balance in working relationship, and staff is going to bring the newest and greatest information to them, and council has to say that will work, that won't work.
I think that comment, your position, your opinion would probably be more relevant today than it would have been, before all these things got passed, because now people are feeling it. They're kind of suffering through it to some degree. And I'm kind of, because I know I want to just, if anybody wants to jump in and ask some questions, please, jump in. I know we have a few people that are here, but I want to talk about SB 9, because as somebody who's a proponent of SB 9, and even though the city of Burbank has an emergency ordinance that says you can only do up to 3 units, you can have 2 primary units. If you're not, I'm not talking about lot splitting, because I think the lot split component is a barrier. Because I don't think it's going to be really that great to a lot of properties. I look at my property. Mine's just about 6,000. I'm a traditional, in the valley of where we are in Burbank, it's called the Flatlands. And, I don't see how we could have developed. We could not have really divided it. I mean, maybe, but I would have had to have watched people drive past my kitchen window to go park in their parking. what I do see is where you could develop two primaries and a two-story. We take our primary down, we put in 2 stories, and those, depending on the floor area ratios, could be, one could be 1,400, one could be 1,200. So those all day long are 3-bedroom, 2-bath for the 2 primaries that are there. And then you go build another 2-story unit in the back. Top is ADU, and you have a garage and storage below it. And then I'm like, then you could have a 2-bedroom, 2-bath there. So you're easily, you have 3, 2, 5, 6 bedrooms on a single family residential lot. And SB9, because it is, no one can really say no to it. It's here. You can, a developer could come in and buy a piece of property, take down the existing buildings and do that. That's here in Burbank. We could do a triplex. In San Fernando and the rest of the San Fernando area, the city of Los Angeles, LA County, you could do a 4-plex. You could do that all day long without having to split it. And that I see is really sort of bringing in that blending in, weaving in is the word I was trying to find, weaving into the community, these little denser developments, not huge 12-unit buildings in a neighborhood, but 4. And I'm kind of surprised that developers haven't been adopting that in higher frequency, because you could get a cap rate of anything into right around 4%. And is that worth it to them? Is it worth it to a homeowner to spend, 1.2 to take it down and build it?
I don't know if you can build it for 1.2.
Right.
I mean, really, look, when we were starting the ADU thing, you can convert a garage for 50,000 and build an ADU for 100. Now I've seen quotes for garages for 150 and ADUs, just simple standalone ADUs for $250,000, $300,000.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could build that many units for 1.2. I doubt it. It costs a lot more. Look, there's a lot we can talk about with that subject. If you want to talk about it. I mean, look, we homeowners purchased our property under the guise that we're buying an R1 neighborhood. That's what my house was zoned for. If I wanted to live in multi-res, I would live in multi-res. I would live in one of my apartment buildings. The reason why we live in the suburbs and not in downtown LA is because we had a choice, and we spent our money and we paid our taxes for that choice. And I think by pulling the rug out of the homeowner, and I'll just take it a step further. If I was purchasing a house today and there were 6 units next to the house I wanted to purchase, I'm out. I do not want to live next to 6 units and potentially 15, 20 people. I choose to live next to a resident family and have a relationship with them. If not, again, I would live in multi-res. So that is my biggest issue, is you're pulling the rug out of the homeowner who saved their money. I mean, when I say save their money, they went without, they tightened their belt, they scrimped, they lived in a lesser apartment rather than a great apartment so that they could live in a single family neighborhood and send their kid to a school that's not overpopulated. And you are changing that, and that's what I have a problem with. And I believe that I think there's some legality issues there, and I really hope someday somebody challenges it.
Meaning take the state of California to court and sue them for this.
Yes.
It's going to be interesting. I think that there is going to be a very the dynamics about the housing issues and how to solve it, I think are going to be in front of us for the rest of our lives. I mean,
but don't you think, before we were talking about all this, but don't you think, what is Burbank? 7 square miles?
107,000.
Shouldn't we say, how many people can live in this area? before we say, okay, we're full. I mean, shouldn't we do a study like our sewer systems are 80 to 100 years old? Our water, we're constantly talking about water shortages, electricity. We don't have the grid. If we went electric today, we do not have the grid to support it. So before we even talk about all this housing stuff, shouldn't we say, like, in the city of Burbank, this is where we're maxed out. We have so many schools. Our schools are suffering with their budgets. And what are we going to do? Are we going to double the amount of students in those schools? Our infrastructure, to look at our infrastructure, it's falling apart. We don't even have a budget that funds it. We have parking structures that are falling apart that we can't keep clean. I mean,
you're getting into a topic that I wanted to bring up to some of the city council and some people, and I think it's very germane for this conversation. City council candidates and those who were elected have talked about the impact of having so many job availabilities, so many people commute into Burbank. You've heard that argument.
It doubles. If they say the numbers are, we double during the day. It's 200,000 people are here in Burbank.
So these people are living. So we have the jobs in Burbank where our population doubles overnight. So people are having to drive in, and the council candidates and people have said, well, that is bad for the environment because they're having to drive and this pollution, and we need to be able to provide more housing, which I kind of look at what was incentivized prior, because you mentioned some of and I'm seeing these developments being built. There are huge skyscrapers going up. I think, is it Warner Brothers where they have the two massive buildings? Do you know how many stories they are? 20, 30 stories? So These are huge builds. So those are going to be thousands of more workers that are coming in without that. So it's kind of like, I don't know if it's a policy question, but I look at it to be able to bring it up to say, if you were building these thousands of units of commercial units where people are going to live, they're going to work, they're going to commute. They're not going to live here because you can't. So that kind of goes to your question. It's like, if you look at Burbank, it goes to your comment. If you look at Burbank, you say you only have 7 square miles or so, and you don't really, and your infrastructure is old and limited, and then you constantly are building more, commercial buildings where more employees are going to work, you kind of exacerbate that argument.
Yeah. Look, I mean, in the olden days, I had a job all the way down by LAX. I commuted from Burbank to LAX. I had another job in Santa Fe Springs. I mean, come on, am I going to move to Santa Fe Springs? No. And I can tell you this, there are people that live in Los Feliz and Silver Lake that would never, ever live in Burbank.
Right.
It's just Burbank, and those are two different worlds. And I'm not passing judgment on Burbank or Silver Lake. People have different, they're wired differently, and they do not want to live in Burbank. They want to live in Silver Lake. So I don't care what you do in Burbank, they're going to commute in. So
yeah, it's very interesting to see the change, because I do know that policymakers have said that they are looking at this from a new kind of perspective, because they're a very young group, a very progressive group of elected officials, from my opinion. And it is going to be interesting to see what they can do with a lot of power behind them, a lot of wind in their sails, to be able to affect change, and how we kind of, and I'm looking around to say, okay, Chris, let's take it from your perspective. What power do you have? I mean, what could you do if you wanted to do something short of suing the state of California?
No, look, I've done all that I can do. I've exhausted all my efforts. Like I told you from the top of this chat, I personally met with every single one of our elected officials. I was willing to donate time, experience, meet with other elected officials, go to Sacramento, because honestly, I think I know what I'm talking about. And the reason why is I have the experience. And what happens in San Francisco and all the surrounding areas are not necessarily happening in Burbank. And you cannot paint every community with the same brush. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There's different things are going on in other communities that may not be happening in Burbank. And there's if that was the case, I would live in North Hollywood, or I live in downtown LA, or I would live in other areas. There's a reason why people move to Burbank. And when you start taking that reason why away, then we become North Hollywood and Van Nuys and Reseda and Chatsworth and so on. There's a reason why. I sell it every day. People tell me, why are you moving to Burbank? Well, I like the police, I like the fire, and I like our schools. I like the infrastructure. Now, current Burbank people will say, oh, our roads suck. When I was 20 years ago, these roads were like glass. Well, try driving in Van Nuys. Our roads are like glass compared to Van Nuys right now.
I agree with you on that one.
But this is the feedback I get from my clients. And if we continue to do what we're going to do, these reasons will erode.
I agree with that. And I think that you shared something as we get close to wrapping up, what is stuck with me. And that is another bite at the apple. And being able to, and I'm thinking about that going, okay, would the new slate of, because we're going to have some changes coming soon, at least with our local elected at the state level. Anthony Portantino, Laura Friedman, Laura Friedman has already kind of thrown her hat into Congressman Adam Schiff's position. And I'm not sure, has Anthony decided if he's going to run for that or do something different? Have you heard?
He is running. I think it was announced today, I believe.
Okay. So those are interesting things. So, and I'm sharing that is because before I really got involved in things that were happening in Burbank and with ADUs, I was kind of, just happily, going along with my life. Wasn't really that affected. And just, que sera, sera. Now, having to look at things that they've been changing, one with the ADUs and then with SB 9, then with the SB 35, and all of the other things that are happening around the city and that have been enacted by the state of California, it's important to be involved. So whether you are a yes in my backyard person like I am, or you're like no, I don't really want that in my backyard like Chris is, you have to get involved. And so Chris is a good example of somebody who's coming at it with a very intelligent perspective and saying and trying to make the argument. He's trying to say and reason why, and he's reaching out to talk. And if you're listening to this, you're watching this and you have some of those kind of, similar thoughts, or you're more like, hey, we need as much housing as we can. Let's incentivize it and take down the barriers. Because the Casita Coalition, which I'm a member of, they want to take down even more barriers. And I like that. It's like, let's build more housing. Let's try to figure out how we can kind of integrate it. But I am sensitive to your concerns and your worries about saying, okay, I bought into Burbank in a single family residential neighborhood, and that has effectively been taken away from me and anybody else that I work with, my clients or any future client. I can't say to them, oh yeah, your neighborhood is going to be protected and stay this way. You need to understand that there could be a triplex or a fourplex built right next to you. So get involved, stay involved, join the conversation, and be able to have conversations like this where you can hear from both sides of it. So I think that that's very important. Thank you very much.
Do you have anyone that had questions?
I'm seeing that we got people on, and I think that they're just happy to hear us kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, if you know Burbank, you can get a hold of me if you want to discuss it. David and I have very different opinions on certain things. I respect David. I'm happy that I can be here and have my point of view listened to and debated. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. If there's a better way, and that's the one thing about the planning board. I love it when residents, not the same residents, but when new residents come to the microphone, I really perk up. You'll always see me kind of do this because I can't wait to see what they have to say, because it's a different point of view than I'm probably going to be used to. And I'm just looking for an answer. And I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy in the room. I'm saying that I just want to collaborate with a lot of different people.
And thank you for that. And I think it's important for everybody who's here. Let's listening and watching, I did put Chris's contact information, his email and his phone number, and where you can reach him. So he is a local realtor broker. And so if you're looking to have any kind of questions about that or debate housing policy, you know, we can do it. Thank you everybody for being here today. Thank you, Chris, for your time again. I really do appreciate it and would love to talk to you again in the future.
Awesome. Great conversation. Thank you.
All right. Take care. All right.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.